Do you know the signs of toxic leadership? This is the sort of leadership that fosters negative behavior, distrust, dishonesty, and feeds poor morale. In today's video, we will explore the most common toxic leadership traits, and by identifying these behaviors, you can protect yourself and your team from their negative effects and work on becoming a more positive and effective leader. Toxic trait number 1 is micromanagement. Micromanagers are over-controlling and way too in the detail of their employees' work. They often dictate every little detail, leaving little room for creativity or autonomy. I have had a manager earlier in my career who definitely fit this category. At first it made me feel stupid, as I felt like I was obviously doing a really bad job if they kept needing to tell me what to do all the time. I kept questioning my own work and my behaviour, as I felt like I obviously wasn't good enough. After a few months though, the feeling of being new in the role wore off a bit, and I started to feel frustrated and annoyed, and a little bit picked on. I was pretty new to work too, so it just emphasised my own feelings of discomfort and isolation. I eventually just asked outright if I was performing really poorly. The response was shock. They hadn't even realised their own behaviour could have been inflicting this feeling upon me. And then it became obvious that it was more about control. And they also didn't really stop. So I decided to choose another job. Micromanagement can definitely lead to low morale, a lack of trust, and in my example, retention issues. If you think you might display a little bit of micromanagement and that feeling that you want to check on everyone just to make sure things are all under control, then check out my video linked on the screen for some tips on how to break this. Toxic trait number 2 is bullying and intimidation. This can involve using fear, threats, or aggression to control or manipulate others. This creates a hostile work environment, damages morale, and can lead to legal consequences. I am fortunate that I cannot claim to have experienced this from a manager, but I have heard plenty of stories over my 17 years in leadership from those who have. I think the most common aspect that people feel is that one around manipulation. This can be subtle and hard to pick up on, particularly if you're not expecting it from a leader. But once it's uncovered, it is very damaging to your leadership reputation and the trust of your team. There are some who will swear by this method of leadership, as they may perceive it as setting clear boundaries and getting results. But I believe you can easily establish clear boundaries and professionalism in leadership and still have engagement and results without bullying or manipulation. Check out the video linked on my screen again for another tip on how to do this. Toxic trait number 3 is a lack of communication. Poor communication may not be considered by some as a toxic trait. It's just how you talk to your team and communicate, right? However, this is a top concern for individuals who have been led by poor communicators. It can create confusion, misunderstandings, and a lack of trust. I have worked with a number of poor communicators, and it is very frustrating. If you aren't getting the right information at the right time, it can undo performance, productivity, and morale. It can mean that your team are wasting their time on the wrong things or spending additional time talking to each other about whether or not you all agree that the direction that you've been given was the same. And this is not a great use of time and can make people feel really frustrated. And you might be surprised that it does cause a lack of trust. Consider the impact of feeling confused about what is expected of you and then feeling really unsure about the actions that you're taking and whether they are the right ones, and having to rely on messages from others to determine whether you're on the right path. It does build a sense of mistrust, that you're not being given the right information, and in the worst cases it can feel like manipulation, that it is being deliberately withheld. Toxic trait number 4 is favoritism. This can occur when certain leaders treat employees differently to each other, usually based on personal preferences or bias. This can lead to resentment, decreased morale, and a loss of trust among team members. I had a manager once who my colleagues and I used to joke that they had a pet of the day. They seemed to favour some members of the team and had a way of really emphasizing this amongst the team. So there was no doubt who was the pet that day. And even though we made a joke out of it amongst ourselves, it was demoralizing because you never knew who was going to be held up to everybody else as being the star and then the pet for the day. And it felt quite competitive. And it may have been their deliberate style as a way of making us all really push ourselves, because then when we did something really great, they'd reward us by publicly acknowledging all the things that we'd done. But it actually had quite a negative impact on the team, because if you weren't the pet for that day, you felt like your contributions weren't really valued or recognised. Toxic trait number 5 is blame shifting. This is avoiding taking responsibility for mistakes and blaming others. This can create a toxic culture of fear and mistrust. It also erodes employee morale and productivity. This one can be subtle, as it can be hidden somewhat if not everyone is across what has been going on and what is known about a situation. So it may be that a leader could get away with blaming a system, a process, or others for outcomes or mistakes. But even if it was that it was a system or a person that was to blame, being a leader means being accountable, and yep, sometimes that means taking the fall for things that weren't your fault. Toxic trait number 6 is a lack of empathy. Empathy is the ability to understand and share in the feelings of others. Leaders who lack empathy can be insensitive to the needs of team members, leading to quite a negative work environment. A lack of empathy can show up as a complete lack of emotion about a situation, despite how emotive it might actually be. It could be that someone is just continuing to barrel through something, even if it's sad or funny, awkward or frustrating for others, with no real regard or care for how others are reacting. Toxic trait number 7 is narcissism. These leaders have an inflated sense of self-importance and a lack of empathy for others. They may be manipulative, demanding, and unwilling to hear the perspective of others. I would note that if you are a narcissist, it is very unlikely that you are watching this video, as you will obviously already know everything you could possibly need to know about leadership, and you would have no need to do this. So my advice is to avoid this type of leader like the plague. Have you experienced toxic leadership in your workplace? Am I missing any that you think should be on the list? I'm keen to hear from you. And for a more inspiring tone, check out the video linked on my screen with the signs that you could actually be a really great leader. And thanks very much for watching.